The starship Harmony's Edge moved slowly through the darkness of space. It was a massive vessel, built to carry diplomats from 12 different species to a peace summit at the edge of the galaxy. The ship hummed with life. Hundreds of beings walked its corridors, each one different from the next. Some had scales, some had feathers, some had too many eyes or too many legs, and somewhere in the lower decks, working alone in a small maintenance room, was human. He was the only one of his kind on the entire ship. He did not mind being alone. In fact, he preferred it. The other species looked at him strangely. They whispered when he passed. He had heard the words they used. Persistence predator, dangerous. He did not feel dangerous. He was just an engineer. He fixed broken things. That was all. Today, the broken thing was the heating system in Cargo Bay 7. The temperature controls had failed 3 days ago, and nobody wanted to go down there to repair them. The cargo bay was cold and dark and forgotten, but did not mind cold or dark places. He grabbed his tools and walked toward the lower decks. The corridors grew emptier as he descended. Most species preferred the upper levels where the air was warmer and the lights were brighter. Past a group of diplomats. They were small creatures with delicate wings and nervous movements. When they saw him, they pressed themselves against the wall and waited for him to pass. Their antennae trembled with fear. Nodded politely and kept walking. He was used to this reaction. On the third level, he saw the signs. They were posted on every wall, written in 17 different languages. The message was simple and clear. Do not approach the young. Do not speak to them. Do not look at them directly. Lethal force is authorized against any who disobey. Stopped and read the sign carefully. He had heard about everyone in the galaxy had heard about them. They were apex predators from a volcanic world called Prime. They stood 8 feet tall and had bodies covered in black scales that could stop a plasma bolt. Their claws could cut through ship hulls. Their teeth could crush bone like paper. They were the most feared species in known space. And apparently, their ambassador had brought his family aboard. Shrugged and continued walking. He had no intention of bothering anyone. He just wanted to fix the heating system and go back to his quarters. Maybe he would read a book. Maybe he would sleep. Simple things. The quarters were on this level. As passed, he heard sounds from inside. Deep growling voices, the scraping of claws on metal, and something else. Something smaller, higher-pitched, almost like laughter. He paused for just a moment, curious. Then he shook his head and moved on. It was not his business. The cargo bay was exactly as cold as the reports had said. Could see his breath forming clouds in the air. Frost had begun to creep across the walls. He set down his toolbox and got to work. The problem was simple. A connection had come loose in the main heating unit. Someone had probably bumped it during loading and never noticed. Reconnected the wires, checked the seals, and activated the system. Warm air began to flow into the bay. He sat down against a supply crate to rest. The warmth felt good after the cold corridors. He closed his eyes for just a moment. That was when he heard the sound. It was soft, a scratching noise like small claws on metal. Opened his eyes and looked toward the cargo bay entrance. 3 small shapes stood in the doorway. They were about the size of Earth dogs, but their bodies were covered in the same black scales as the adult. Their eyes glowed faintly golden in the dim light. Their mouths were filled with tiny needle-sharp teeth. The cubs did not move. He barely breathed. His mind raced through everything he knew about culture. Their young were sacred, protected. Anyone who touched them without permission would be killed, slowly, painfully. The parents would not stop until the offender was dead. But the cubs did not seem afraid of him. They stood in the doorway, sniffing the air. Their small nostrils flared as they detected the warmth flowing from the newly repaired heating system. One of them made a sound. It was almost like a chirp. Then they began to move toward him. His heart beat faster. He should leave. He should stand up slowly and walk away. He should report this to security and let someone else handle it. That was the smart thing to do, the safe thing. But the cubs looked cold. Their small bodies were trembling slightly. The corridors outside were freezing, and their quarters were on the other side of the level. They must have wandered away from their parents and gotten lost in the cold passages. The smallest cub reached him first. It sniffed his leg, then his hand. Its nose was warm and slightly wet. Its scales were softer than he expected. The cub made another chirping sound, and then it climbed into his lap. Froze completely. The second cub followed. It pressed itself against his side, seeking his warmth. The third cub circled him once, sniffed his neck, and then settled under his arm. They were so small, so helpless. Their tiny claws gripped his clothing as they adjusted their positions. Their bodies radiated a surprising amount of heat now that they were warming up. Within minutes, all three cubs had arranged themselves around him like he was their personal heating unit. Did not know what to do. If he moved, he might scare them. If he stayed, their parents might find him and assume the worst. Either option could end with him dead. But the cubs were already falling asleep. Their breathing slowed. Their small bodies relaxed against him. One of them began to purr. It was a deep, rumbling sound that vibrated through his chest. He looked down at the sleeping creatures. They trusted him. They had chosen him for warmth and safety. Some ancient part of his human brain responded to that trust. These were young things, helpless things. They needed protection. Leaned his head back against the crate and closed his eyes. He would figure out what to do when they woke up. For now, he would let them sleep. The warm air circulated through the cargo bay. The cubs purred softly, and somewhere above, their parents had just discovered that their children were missing. The ship was about to become very dangerous for. But he did not know that yet. He was already asleep, surrounded by the most deadly creatures in the galaxy, dreaming of nothing at all. The scream that echoed through the ship was not a sound that any species wanted to hear. It was the scream of a mother discovering that her children were gone. Stood in the empty sleeping chamber, her golden eyes blazing with a fire that could burn worlds. The nest was cold. The blankets were pushed aside. The small tunnel that led to the ventilation shaft had been opened from the inside. Her cubs had escaped. Her bobbies were somewhere on this ship, alone and unprotected. Arrived moments later. He was the ambassador, a massive creature standing nearly 9 feet tall with scars across his snout from ancient battles. When he saw the empty nest, something changed in his eyes. The diplomat disappeared. The father emerged, and the father was far more dangerous. He threw back his head and roared. The sound shook the walls. 3 levels above, a diplomat fainted. 2 levels below, the ship's captain spilled his drink and immediately called for security. Within minutes, the entire vessel went into lockdown. Red lights flashed in every corridor. Doors sealed automatically. Announcements played in 17 languages, warning all passengers to remain in their quarters until further notice. The peace summit was forgotten. Nothing mattered now except finding the cubs. Security chief arrived at the quarters with a team of 12 armed officers. Was a species with 4 arms and tough skin. He had served on hundreds of diplomatic missions. He had handled dozens of crisis situations, but he had never seen anything like the fury in his eyes. The ambassador grabbed by the throat and lifted him off the ground with one clawed hand. The security officers raised their weapons, but they knew it was pointless. Could kill all of them before a single shot was fired. Spoke slowly. His voice was like stones grinding together. He wanted to know where his children were. He wanted to know now. If they were harmed, he would tear this ship apart piece by piece. He would kill everyone aboard. He would burn the wreckage until nothing remained. Could not speak. The claws around his throat were too tight. He could only nod desperately and hope the ambassador understood. Dropped him, he told to find his cubs. He gave him 1 hour. After that, the killing would begin. The security team scattered. They searched every deck, every room, every storage closet. They checked the medical bay and the engineering sections. They scanned the cargo holds and the maintenance tunnels. The cubs were nowhere to be found. Meanwhile, panic spread through the ship like a disease. The delegates sealed themselves in their quarters and refused to open the doors for anyone. Ambassador of the had recovered from fainting only to faint again when she heard about the 1-hour deadline. The crew members prepared weapons they knew would be useless. Everyone waited for the violence to begin. In her small laboratory on the 5th level, Park heard the announcements and felt her stomach drop. She was human-like. She was the ship's botanist, responsible for maintaining the oxygen-producing plants in the garden section. She had been on the Harmony's edge for 6 months. In that time, had become her only real friend. He was strange and quiet. He preferred machines to people, but he was kind in his own way. He fixed things without being asked. He remembered small details about her life. He brought her coffee from the mess hall when she worked late. She worried about him constantly because he had no sense of danger. He would walk into situations that would terrify anyone else without even noticing the risk. Checked her communicator, had not responded to the lockdown alarm. His location beacon showed his last known position, Cargo Bay 7, Lower Deck 3. That was near the quarters. That was exactly where the cubs had disappeared. Her blood ran cold. She tried to call him. No answer. She sent a message. No response. Either his communicator was broken, or he was unconscious, or he was already dead. Made a decision. She could not wait for security to find him. By the time they searched the lower decks, the hour would be up, would begin his rampage, and if was found anywhere near those cubs, the ambassador would assume the worst. She grabbed a small flashlight and left her laboratory. The corridors were empty. Everyone was hiding. She moved quickly through the red-lit passages, her footsteps echoing in the silence. The lower decks were freezing. The environmental controls had failed in this section, and maintenance had not yet made repairs. Could see frost on the walls. She could see her breath forming clouds in the air. Why would anyone come down here? Then she remembered. Was an engineer. Someone had probably assigned him to fix the heating system. He would have gone to the source of the problem. He would have ignored the cold and the warnings and the danger. He would have focused only on the task. That was who he was. That was why she liked him. And that was why he was probably about to die. Reached Cargo Bay 7. The door was open. Warm air flowed from inside, which meant had succeeded in his repairs. She stepped through the entrance and stopped. The sight before her was impossible. Was sitting against a supply crate, his eyes closed, his breathing slow and peaceful. He was clearly asleep, and wrapped around him, pressed against him, curled in his lap and under his arm and across his chest, were the 3 cubs. They were also asleep. Their small bodies rose and fell with each breath. One of them was purring loudly. Another had its razor-filled snout pressed against his neck. The third had wrapped its tail around his wrist like it was holding his hand. They looked comfortable. They looked safe. They looked like they had found exactly where they wanted to be. Did not move. She could not move. Her mind was trying to process what she was seeing, and it was failing completely. Her communicator buzzed. It was a message from security. They had tracked her location. They were coming to search Cargo Bay 7, and they were bringing the parents with them. Looked at her sleeping friend. She looked at the deadly cubs curled around him like he was their mother. She thought about and his promise to kill everyone. She had maybe 5 minutes before they arrived. 5 minutes to figure out how to save his life. She had no idea where to start. Stood frozen in the doorway of Cargo Bay 7. Her heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. Every instinct told her to run. Every bit of common sense screamed that she should get as far away from this situation as possible. But her feet would not move. She could not leave. She forced herself to breathe slowly. Think, she told herself, think clearly. What are the options? Option 1, wake and run. But that would disturb the cubs. They might cry out. They might be frightened. and frightened cubs could do terrible damage with their claws. Even if they escaped the cargo bay, where would they go? The ship was in lockdown. Every corridor was monitored. They would be caught within minutes. Option 2, contact security and explain the situation. Tell them that did not kidnap the cubs. Tell them it was an accident, but would anyone believe her? The galaxy already feared humans. They called them predators. If a human was found with young, everyone would assume the worst, would be killed before he could speak a single word in his defense. Option 3, stay here. Wait, hope for a miracle. Did not believe in miracles, but she had nothing else. She stepped into the cargo bay quietly, moving closer to her friend. The warm air wrapped around her like a blanket. The heating system hummed steadily, had done good work. The temperature was perfect now. Not too hot for most species, but warm enough for the volcanic-born cubs to feel comfortable. That was why they had come here, realized. The corridors were freezing. The cubs had been cold and scared. They had followed the warmth and found. She knelt beside him, careful not to make any sudden movements. The cubs did not wake. They were deeply asleep, their small bodies completely relaxed. She had never seen look peaceful before. The adults were always tense, always ready to fight. But these little ones had no fear at all. They trusted the human they were sleeping on. It was beautiful, and it was going to get killed. Reached out and gently touched his shoulder. His eyes opened slowly. For a moment he looked confused. Then he saw her face and seemed to remember where he was. He looked down at the cubs. His expression did not change. He simply nodded, as if waking up covered in deadly predator bobbies was a normal thing that happened to people. He whispered to her. He asked why she was here. He asked what time it was. Whispered back. She told him about the lockdown. She told him about rage. She told him that security was coming. She told him that he had about 4 minutes to live. Considered this information. He did not panic. He did not cry. He simply looked at the sleeping cubs and sighed. He said he could not move. If he moved, they would wake up, and they looked so comfortable. Wanted to scream at him. She wanted to shake him and tell him that his comfort was not worth his life, but she saw something in his eyes that stopped her. It was not stupidity. It was not ignorance. It was something else entirely. It was the look of someone who had made a choice. Spoke softly. He said the cubs had been cold. They had been trembling when they found him. They were just bobbies, lost and scared in the dark. He could not push them away. He could not leave them to freeze. So he had stayed. He had kept them warm. And now, whatever happened, at least they had slept peacefully for a little while. Felt tears forming in her eyes. This was the problem with. He was so stupidly kind. He cared about things that could kill him. He saw helpless creatures instead of threats. He was going to die because he had a good heart, and that was the most unfair thing she had ever known. Heavy footsteps echoed in the corridor outside. Voices shouted commands. Metal scraped against metal. They were here. Stood up and turned to face the entrance. If she could not save, she could at least stand beside him. She could tell them the truth. She could make them listen. The cargo bay doors exploded inward, charged through, his massive form filling the entire doorway. His golden eyes burned with murderous intent. His claws were extended, ready to tear flesh from bone. Behind him came, equally terrifying, equally ready to kill. Behind them came the security team, weapons drawn, faces pale with fear. For one heartbeat, nothing happened. Everyone froze. Saw the human sitting against the crate. He saw the cubs wrapped around the human's body. He saw the smallest one with its snout pressed against the human's neck. He saw the trust in their sleeping forms. His roar shook the cargo bay. It was a sound of pure rage, pure violence, pure promise of death. He lunged forward, claws aimed its throat. And then the cubs woke up. The smallest one lifted its head and made a sound. It was not a cry of fear. It was not a scream of alarm. It was a chirp, a happy, contented chirp. The sound a cub makes when it sees its parents after a good sleep. The other 2 cubs joined in. They yawned, showing their tiny needle teeth. They stretched, extending their small claws. Then they snuggled closer too, pressing their warm bodies against him, making more happy sounds. They were not afraid of their parents, but they were also not leaving the human. Stopped, his claws were inches from his face. His chest heaved with heavy breaths. His eyes flickered between his cubs and the human they refused to leave. Moved past him. She approached slowly, her head lowered, her nostrils flaring. She was smelling the air. She was reading the scene with senses that no other species could understand. She stopped in front of, she leaned close. She inhaled deeply, taking in his scent, the scent of her cubs, the scent of everything that had happened in this room. The cargo bay was silent. Everyone waited. No one breathed. Raised her head, she looked at her mate, and she spoke 4 words that changed everything. She said, "He smells like safety." Did not understand. None of them understood, but was not finished. She said, "He smells like a den, like warmth, like pack." The cubs chose him, they followed him, they trusted him, and they were right. She stepped back and sat down on the floor, her massive body folding gracefully. She looked at the human with new eyes, not the eyes of a predator, not the eyes of a mother defending her young. The eyes of someone who had just discovered something impossible. She told that her cubs had never trusted anyone outside their family. Never. Not in 3 generations. Not in 300 years. And yet they had found him in the dark and they had felt safe. She asked him what he was. Looked at her. He looked at. He looked at the security team and the weapons and the fear on every face. Then he looked down at the cubs still curled around him. The smallest one had fallen back asleep. Its purr vibrated against his chest. He said he was just a human. He fixed things, that was all. Made a sound that might have been a laugh. It was deep and rumbling and strange. She said he was much more than that. He was something the galaxy had never seen before, something that had been searching for without knowing it. She said he was Pack. The word hung in the air like a physical thing. Pack. In the language, it was the most sacred word that existed. It meant family. It meant blood. It meant those you would die for and those who would die for you. It was never used lightly. It was never given to outsiders. And had just given it to a human. Stared at his mate. His claws were still extended. His muscles were still tense. The rage had not left his body, but something else had entered his eyes. Confusion. Uncertainty. Things that apex predators rarely felt. He demanded an explanation. His voice was harsh and grating. He wanted to know why his mate would speak such words. This creature was human. This creature was an alien. This creature had been found with their cubs in a dark room, alone, without permission. Did not flinch. She met her mate's eyes with equal fire. She told him to smell the air. She told him to use his senses instead of his anger. She told him to look at their children. Looked. The cubs were awake now, but they had not moved from his body. They watched their father with curious golden eyes. They made soft chirping sounds. They seemed completely untroubled by the violence that had almost happened. The smallest cub climbed higher on his chest and pressed its snout against his chin. It licked his face once, then settled back down with a contented sigh. Asked her mate if that looked like a prisoner. She asked if that looked like a victim. She asked if their children had ever shown such affection to anyone outside their immediate family. The answer was no. Knew it. Everyone in the room knew it. Cubs were taught from birth to fear strangers. They were taught that the galaxy was dangerous, that other species could not be trusted, that only their own kind was safe. These lessons were enforced through centuries of conflict and betrayal. And yet here were 3 cubs, completely at ease with a human, treating him like he belonged to them. Security Chief stepped forward slowly. His 4 arms were raised in a gesture of peace. He said they needed to understand what had happened. He said they needed the human to explain. Nodded. He spoke quietly, careful not to disturb the cub on his chest. He told them about the broken heating system. He told them about coming to Cargo Bay 7 to make repairs. He told them about the cubs appearing in the doorway, cold and trembling, seeking warmth. He said he had not touched them. He had not approached them. He had simply sat still and let the warm air flow. The cubs had come to him on their own. They had climbed onto him like he was a heating rock. They had fallen asleep before he could figure out what to do. He said he knew the laws, he knew the warnings. He knew that touching young meant death, but they were cold, they were scared, they were Bobbies, he could not push them away. Ambassador of the had arrived at some point during the commotion. She stood near the back of the crowd, her wings trembling, her compound eyes wide with disbelief. She spoke in her high, nervous voice. She asked if the human was claiming that he had allowed predator cubs to sleep on him out of kindness. Looked at her. He did not understand why this was surprising. Spoke up. She said that was always like this. She said he fed stray animals in the cargo holds. She said he adjusted the temperature in her laboratory so her plants would grow better. She said he once spent 4 hours fixing a cleaning robot that no one else cared about, just because it looked sad. She said he did not know how to leave helpless things alone. It was not in his nature. The delegates had also emerged from their hiding places. They stood in the corridor listening. One of them, a tall being with silver scales and 3 eyes, stepped forward. He said he had studied humans before this voyage. He said they were classified as persistence predators on there. They hunted by chasing prey until it collapsed from exhaustion. They were patient. They were relentless. They were dangerous. But there was something else in the data, something that had puzzled scientists for decades. Humans formed bonds with other species. They kept animals in their homes. They called them pets. They loved them, fed them, protected them, grieved when they died. Some of these animals were predators themselves. Some had teeth and claws. Some could easily harm a human if they chose. But they rarely chose, because humans gave them something that no other species in the galaxy could provide. They gave them safety, warmth, comfort, trust. They said that humans were not just predators. They were also protectors. They had evolved to care for things smaller than themselves. It was written into their biology. It was part of what made them human. Nodded slowly. She said she could smell it on. His scent carried no threat. His body language showed no aggression. His heartbeat was slow and steady, even now, even with claws inches from his throat. He was calm because he truly meant no harm. He was safe because safety was what he offered. Finally lowered his claws. The rage drained from his body, replaced by something else, something that might have been wonder. He approached slowly, his massive form casting a shadow over the human and the cubs. He leaned down and inhaled deeply. He took in the scent that his mate had described. He let it fill his lungs and reach his brain. He processed it with senses that had evolved over millions of years to detect threats. He found no threat. He found no danger. He found only what it said. Pack. Straightened. He looked at the security team, at the diplomats, at everyone who had gathered to witness this moment. He spoke in a voice that carried through the cargo bay and into the corridor beyond. He said the human had protected his cubs. The human had kept them warm when they were cold. The human had given them comfort when they were lost. This was not a crime. This was not a violation. This was what Pack did for Pack. He said was under protection now. Anyone who threatened him would answer to clan. Anyone who harmed him would face the full wrath of the most feared species in the galaxy. The cargo bay was silent. No one knew how to respond. This had never happened before. In 300 years of galactic diplomacy, no outsider had ever been accepted by the. Looked up at the massive predator standing over him. He did not seem frightened. He did not seem relieved. He seemed mostly confused. He asked if this meant he could put the cubs down now. The smallest cub made a protesting sound and gripped his shirt. Made that strange, rumbling laugh that his mate had made earlier. He said the cubs would decide when they were ready to leave. Until then, the human should remain still. Sighed and leaned back against the crate, the cubs settled around him once more. The warmth continued to flow, and somewhere in the ship the news began to spread. The human had done the impossible. He had befriended the most dangerous creatures in the galaxy. And he had done it by taking a nap. The Peace Summit was supposed to be the most important event in galactic history. 12 species had gathered to discuss trade agreements, border disputes, and mutual defense treaties. Ambassadors had prepared speeches for months. Diplomats had memorized protocols and procedures. The fate of billions hung in the balance. None of that mattered anymore. Everyone was talking about the human. The story spread through the ship like fire. It reached the upper decks within hours. It reached the communication arrays by the next morning. It reached the of every species aboard within a week. The human who had befriended the cubs. The who had earned the protection of the galaxy's most feared predators. The impossible creature who had done the impossible thing. Scientists began requesting data. Researchers began writing papers. Governments began reassessing everything they thought they knew about humanity. For 300 years, humans had been classified as dangerous. They came from a world of extreme conditions. Their planet had hurricanes and earthquakes and volcanic eruptions. Their oceans were filled with monsters. Their lands were crawling with venomous creatures. And somehow, against all odds, humans had survived and thrived. They were persistence predators. They could run for hours without stopping. They could heal from wounds that would kill other species. They could eat foods that were toxic to almost everyone else. They were tough and stubborn and seemingly unkillable. But the incident revealed something new, something that changed everything. Humans were comfort predators. The term was coined by a scientist named. He published a paper explaining what he had observed aboard the Harmony's Edge. Humans radiated heat like living furnaces. Their body temperature was higher than almost any other sentient species. They were warm to the touch, constantly producing thermal energy, naturally suited to cold environments. Their heartbeats were slow and steady. While most species had rapid, nervous pulses, humans had a rhythm that was almost hypnotic. It was calming, soothing. It signaled safety to creatures that lived by instinct. Their scent carried no threat pheromones. Unlike true predators who smelled of danger and aggression, humans smelled neutral, clean. Their bodies did not broadcast hostile intentions. To sensitive noses like they smelled like dens, like safe places, like home. And most importantly, humans instinctively gentled themselves around small creatures. They moved slowly. They spoke softly. They made themselves smaller and less threatening. It was built into their nature. Millions of years of evolution had programmed them to protect young things, even young things that were not their own. The galaxy had been afraid of humans for the wrong reasons. Yes, they were dangerous. Yes, they were persistent. Yes, they could survive almost anything. But they were also guardians, protectors, creatures that inspired trust in the most unlikely places. The Peace Summit resumed after 3 days of chaos, but everything had changed. The delegation, previously isolated and feared, now sat beside the human engineer at every meal, introduced to every ambassador personally. He called him Pack Friend. He called him Den Keeper. He called him the Warm One. The cubs refused to leave alone. Security eventually stopped trying to separate them. Every morning when went to work on the ship's systems, 3 small followed behind him like shadows. They sat beside him while he repaired machinery. They napped in his lap during breaks. They growled at anyone who spoke too harshly in his presence. Found the whole situation hilarious. She visited in the engineering bay every afternoon, just to watch the cubs compete for space on his body. She brought snacks from the mess hall and shared them with her friend, while the smallest cub tried to steal food from his plate. She asked him if he understood what he had done. She asked him if he realized that he had changed galactic politics forever. Shrugged, he said he had fixed a heating system and taken a nap. That was all. Laughed until she cried. The final ceremony of the Peace Summit took place in the Grand Hall of the Harmony's Edge. Representatives from all 12 species gathered to sign the treaties and agreements that would shape the galaxy for generations. It was a formal event, filled with speeches and traditions and ancient protocols. Requested permission to speak before the signing. The other ambassadors agreed nervously. No one knew what the leader would say. Stood before the assembly. His massive form dominated the stage. His golden eyes swept across the gathered diplomats. His voice rumbled like distant thunder. He said they had been alone for 300 years. They had trusted no one. They had feared nothing. They had believed that strength was the only thing that mattered in the galaxy. But strength had not kept his cubs warm. Strength had not given them comfort when they were lost and afraid. Strength had not inspired them to trust a stranger in the dark. A human had done that. A single human, with nothing but warmth and patience and kindness, had done what no amount of power could achieve. He said they would sign the peace treaty, not because they feared the other species, not because they wanted trade or territory or influence. They would sign because they had finally found something worth protecting. He placed his clawed hand on shoulder. The human stood beside him on the stage, looking deeply uncomfortable. 3 cubs sat at his feet, watching the crowd with curious eyes. Announced that was pack friend to clan. Any who threatened him answered to the nation. Any who honored him would find friends among the most powerful predators in known space. The hall was silent for a long moment. Then Ambassador of the rose from her seat. She walked to the stage on trembling legs. She stopped before and extended one delicate hand. She said they would also call him friend. If a human could make the trust, then perhaps there was hope for everyone. One by one, the other ambassadors followed. The species that had feared humans for centuries now approached with open hands and curious eyes. Accepted each greeting politely. He did not seem to understand why everyone was making such a big deal about this. He had done nothing special. He had just been kind. That night after the treaties were signed and the celebrations had ended, found in his quarters. He was lying in his bunk, reading a maintenance manual. The smallest cub had escaped its parents again and was curled up on his chest, purring loudly. Sat on the edge of the bed and smiled at her friend. She asked him what he was going to do now. She asked him if he was ready to be famous. Lowered his manual and thought about the question. He looked at the cub sleeping on his chest. He looked at his friend sitting beside him. He looked at the stars visible through his small window. He said he was going to fix the water recycler on deck 7 tomorrow. It had been making strange noises. Someone should look at it. Shook her head. She told him he was impossible. Smiled. It was a small smile, barely visible, but it was real. He said he was just doing his job. That was all he had ever done. That was all he would ever do. The cub purred, the ship hummed, the galaxy turned. And somewhere in the vast darkness of space, the story of the human and the predator's cub spread from world to world, system to system, species to species. They called it many things, a miracle, an anomaly, a sign of change. But the truth was simpler than any of that. A cold creature had found warmth. A scared creature had found safety. A lost creature had found home. And a human had simply done what humans do best. He had cared.